Hey folks, welcome back to New Africa. This is Chris here once again. And I've waited a couple days to talk about this, but it's important to bring this out. Now, this is a news article from the New York Times posted on the 16th of October this year in response to events that took place on the 16th of October in Senekal in the Free State in South Africa. Now, the title of the article is Killing of White Farmer Becomes a Flashpoint in South Africa. The authors are Lindsay Schutel and Monica Mark. The reason for this is to give some balanced feedback and input and insight into what's happening here with the mainstream media and how they distort things and intentionally leave important parts of a story out to give a false narrative as to what's happening. Now, what they report in here is largely factual, although there are a few errors, and I'll point them out, but that's not the point. You can tell the facts and create a narrative and spin a tale that's dishonest. And I think that those watching this will probably agree with my assessment that there's a lot of dishonesty in this article and intentional omissions that paint a picture that's very inaccurate as to what this was about and what's happening in South Africa. So with that, let's get started. I'll be reading certain sections of the article just so I can comment on them. The first paragraph, outside a court hearing for two black suspects in a murder case, white Afrikaners nostalgic for the apartheid era and black protesters angry that whites still own most farmland squared off. Well, what's your basis for that? That's just hyperbole. White Afrikaners nostalgic for the apartheid era. Who? There were white South Africans located in multiple parts of the town during this violent protest by the economic freedom fighters. Which of them were nostalgic for the apartheid era, and how exactly were they nostalgic? Yes, we saw some people walk around in paramilitary uniforms, but what's your point? That doesn't make 4.8 million white South Africans nostalgic for the apartheid era, and it doesn't make the hundreds of people gathered on the 16th of October in Senekal nostalgic for the apartheid era. Unless you're interviewing someone or have a photograph of someone that you're specifically commenting on, that's a bogus and fraudulent statement. And black protesters angry that whites still own most of the farmland squared off. That's nonsense. The few black EFF members actually interviewed, including an interview by Big Daddy Liberty of a young lady with a ludicrous tattoo on her neck, asked her, why are you here? Because of the court case. But why? Against racism. What racism? I don't know. The whites, I suppose. No discussion of farmland. That's a false attribution of a motivation for an event that took place that they're not putting any sources. This is not news. This is hyperbole and opinion. It's a news article, not listed as an opinion piece, but as a news article. That is hyperbole. It's inaccurate. A young white farm manager was found earlier this month strangled and tied to a pole on a farm. Actually, factually incorrect, and also downplaying the horrific way that this young man was murdered. He was stabbed repeatedly, beaten severely, and hung from a pole. The knife used to stab and wound him left stuck in the ground in front of his mutilated corpse to send a message to those who live on the farms in South Africa. That is an accurate statement. Strangled and tied to a pole. No, he was hung. Would you say that a black man lynched in 1906 in Mississippi was tied to a pole? No, he was lynched. Inaccurate, incorrect. At a packed court hearing on Friday, the police captain investigating the case said that the suspects were part of a ring of livestock thieves operating in the area, and then it appeared that the motive was robbery rather than racial animus. Really? Why was he stabbed repeatedly, beaten, hung, left to be found by others in a clear sign to frighten them? That's not racial animus. That's not domestic terrorism. That's a stock theft. So cattle rustlers habitually mutilate, torture, and murder people so they can steal stock. No mention of the fact that the two suspects, one has been arrested twice for previous crimes and got out on bail, and the other suspect arrested 16 times for violent crimes. No mention of that in this story whatsoever. Racial animus? You want to make the argument it's criminal activity. A far stronger argument is not this police officer's nonsensical description of it, but the fact that the person has been charged 16 times with crimes and is not in jail. That's a more convincing argument, but that's not here. It's lacking. Tension is particularly high in rural farming areas where white people still own a vast majority of the farms and black people still serve as their impoverished laborers. Notice the use of the adjective impoverished. And why are black South Africans impoverished? Because the ANC has been stealing through its state capture, progressively becoming more adept at pilfering the funds from the public and destroying South Africa's economy for their own benefit, not for black South Africans, not for whites, colors, or Indians, but for their own benefit. And that's right, the ANC is comprised of members of all groups, their benefit, for their cadres. Yeah, impoverished laborers. Whose fault is that? 30 years, 26 years after the end of apartheid. Also, factually incorrect, where white people still own a vast majority. That's a false comment. White people don't own the vast majority of farms. 95,000 white South Africans own farms. 95,000. That's 52% according to the 2017 land survey, the government's land survey. 52% of farms are owned by whites, not the vast majority. Over half, the majority, but not the vast majority. You see how they manipulate the public with these false adjectives and false descriptions? Some white activist groups say that what they call farm murders, in quotes, represent the beginning of a white genocide, in quotes, aimed at driving whites out of South Africa. Why are farm murders in quotes? It's an actual crime. Someone murdered on a farm is a description of where they were murdered. That's not a quote. The quotes are meant to diminish and undermine the credibility of the statement. White genocide, one can argue about that for and against that. There are groups making that argument. I don't know that that's an argument one can make, but that is one that people are making. But it's not legitimate to put farm murders in quotes. That's utter nonsense. Critics see this as a deeply distorted narrative promoted by white beneficiaries of apartheid to drum up international sympathy. I'm sorry. Brendan Horner was 21 years old, born 5 years after the end of apartheid, grew up the so-called born-free generations of South Africans. He didn't own a farm. He was a laborer, a farm manager on someone else's farm. What white beneficiary was he? Don't start with your moral equivalency nonsense. This is fraudulent reporting here. Fraudulent reporting. Critics see this as deeply distorted. What critics? Name them. There are out there. They could have named them. They're just making this up because they didn't quote any critics. What critics? They point out that the violent crime is common in South Africa. It is, and I rail against the 60 murders per day, the vast majority of victims who are black. And that's what they say here. But there's a difference here. These farm murders aren't simply murder. It's not someone in a cash and transit heist getting shot by police or gangsters on the street. It's not someone being robbed and being murdered because they woke up and the perpetrators are afraid of being identified. It's not the violent gender-based violence, the rapes that happen against women in South Africa. It's not that. These people are tortured, brutalized, mutilated, body parts cut off, penises cut off, breasts cut off, 11, 9-year-old, 15-year-old girls gang raped, 4-month pregnant women with 2 small children, 4 and 8 years of age, murdered by having their throat cut from ear to ear. 4 months pregnant. Pliers, blowtorches. This isn't simply crime, murder. This is violent. And it's race-based or it's political-based. You take your pick. But to claim that this moral equivalency, the majority of victims are black, they are. And we talk about that. That has no bearing in this article whatsoever. This article is not about violent crime in South Africa. It's about farm murders in South Africa, but they distort it by bringing in moral equivalency. Of the 21,325 murder victims last year, 49 were white farmers. Well, that's not germane to the conversation. It's not part of the conversation. There were thousands of cash and transit heists last year. People were killed. What does that have to do with farm murders? Not a damn thing. And neither do these other murders. These are a unique situation. Gee, many crickets. I'll tell you what. You just got to wonder here. You got to wonder. Now, Kanye Magubani, a political commentator and journalist, said of the white farmers, they don't see the bigger picture of dysfunctionality in South Africa. Everybody's being targeted. Everybody's being robbed. Well, he doesn't see the bigger picture of what's happening here. This isn't regular crime. And everybody's being targeted? No. South Africa is a violent society. Groups aren't being targeted specifically because of their race, unless they happen to be white commercial farmers, and increasingly more so, white South Africans, colored South Africans, Indian South Africans being targeted by thugs and gangsters. The farmers jeered as buses and minivans ferrying supporters of the economic freedom fighters drove by, some passengers singing Kill the Boer, a Liberation era song that has been declared hate speech. Well, that's accurate. Thank you for your honesty there. But how about the rest of the story? Some passengers? No. Thousands of EFF supporters took to the streets and chanted and sang, "Kill the Boer, shoot the Boer, shoot to kill the Boer." It's hate speech. It's a crime. And it's inciting racial violence. Why aren't you saying that? It's inciting racial violence. It's a call to murder people on the basis of their skin pigmentation. But the New York Times can't be bothered with those facts. They can't be bothered with the fact that thousands of people are chanting and singing in the streets. Some on buses. No. Get the story straight. They do that just so they can't be called on the carpet and say, well, we reported that they were singing. No, you reported dishonestly. You didn't report the facts of what happened here. The founding leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, a firebrand expelled from the ruling African National Congress, said, "We are here to fight and die against apartheid because South Africa still has got apartheid." You're damn skippy it does. Race-based policies that discriminate against minorities, Indians, coloreds, whites in South Africa, discriminated. Not allowed to compete for government tenders, which sucks up about 30, 40, maybe half of the economy sucked up by parastatals and government activity. So South Africans are aced out of nearly half the economy in South Africa by race-based legislation, which is vile, and it's disruptive, and it's dangerous, and it's undermining South Africa's economy. We've seen this for years. The economy is already collapsing before the Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19. But a firebrand, the man is an acknowledged bigot. He calls for insurrection, civil war, murdering of white South Africans. Distorts the narrative. He spoke for over 20 minutes. Not a single mention of any of the racial hatred that spewed out of this man's mouth. Not a single word. This is dishonest. This is not true. This is not accurate. This is the international media. The New York Times. It's no wonder that so many commentators call the New York Times the New York Slimes. This is slimy. A balanced article would have talked about the 20-minute rant that Julius Malema went on, spewing racial invectives and distorting South African history, lying to an incensed and fired up crowd. But that's what he does all the time with no consequences. A 2017 government survey found that white farmers control nearly 70% of farms held by individual owners in South Africa. That is not factually correct. You are wrong. Look up the 2017 land survey or go to my LinkedIn article and read the reference, the citation, and the actual screen capture, the actual picture of the tables from the survey. About 52% of farms in South Africa are owned by whites. 95,000 whites. There are 4.8 million whites in South Africa. So stop this moral equivalency that it's okay to kill white people because the whites own all the land. Number one, they don't own all the land. That's fiction. The Zulu king owns 2.8 million hectares of land in KwaZulu-Natal, hampering economic growth, prosperity, and generational wealth building for black Zulu South Africans because he controls all that land and he decides how it's used. The government controls millions of hectares of land. No discussion about that whatsoever. Much of the land was brutally confiscated for African inhabitants generations ago. No. Fraud once again. Get your history straight. Warfare, as detestable and unfortunate as it is a legitimate form of political discourse. I'm not advocating warfare. Having served in combat, I'm against it and would have been against it anyway. But it is a legitimate form of political discourse. That's the reality here. Stop lying to the world. Generations ago. No. There was an agreement, no mention of the CODESA Summit, the Convention for Democratic South Africa that took place with all the parties, the former Bantustans, the Pan-African Congress, the African National Congress, the National Party. All of these parties came together and they hammered out an agreement to have democratic elections in 1994, an interim constitution which they worked out there, and they reached an agreement saying that no land could be claimed before 1910 because there was no South Africa before 1910. The Union of South Africa created South Africa in 1910. That's a legitimate basis to do it from. Anyone who was deprived of land, whatever their ethnicity, and all races were deprived, but almost overwhelmingly blacks, but others were as well, and coloreds. Anyone could make a land claim. Between 1995 and 1999, a 5-year window, 75,000 plus land claims were filed. The vast majority of those, over 73,000, about 74,000, were long ago settled. The ones that remain are contentious ones because groups have made spurious claims to land and the government hasn't sorted out. Plus, the government doesn't put the effort into it because they don't care about land. It's not about land. They're busy pilfering South Africa's economy. They'll come for the land when they've destroyed every business in South Africa. There's nothing left to pilfer, just like ZANU-PF did. As long as as they can pilfer from other places, they'll leave the land alone. That's the bottom line. They being the African National Congress. But get your information correct. Now, they do say that in the Free State, black South Africans own just 3% of farms. That may be true. I don't recall the figure without looking up what the actual figure is for Free State farms. South Africa's president spoke out about the killing. That's what they say earlier this week. He said that they're not genocidal. They're acts of criminality and must be treated as such. No, that's fraudulent. Cyril Ramaphosa has never spoken out against farm killings. He was driven to speak out against this because of what happened on the 6th of October when thousands of peaceful protesters or presents just showed up in Senekal and the police overreacted and incited violence and caused all kinds of chaos, discharging a weapon recklessly inside a courthouse, running armored vehicles into crowds of bystanders, charging the courthouse, knocking down the courthouse wall, throwing flashbang grenades at people not even involved, just standing on the side of the street and then running off like cowards. The SAPs caused those problems, primarily. Yes, a police vehicle was overturned, and that's a criminal act. Someone's been charged with that crime. But don't distort reality. Ramaphosa has never spoken about it. He denies farm killings. To Bloomberg, he spoke in New York at the United Nations Summit in 2018. He said that there are no farm murders in South Africa. There are no white farmers murdered. That's his words. And he's not spoken out about farm murder since then, other than to deny the phenomenon of people being murdered and tortured on the farms. So to quote the president of South Africa and give the impression that he's addressing this is fraudulent. It's dishonest. It's factually correct what he said. Yeah, great. You can't be sued because you got your facts correct. But your narrative is fraudulent. Where is the comment about Cyril Ramaphosa denying this for the last 2.5 years? Where is the comment about when he went on Bloomberg News? We have the video. It's his own words. He's not being misquoted. It's not hyperbole. He said there are no farm murders. There are no farm murders. No white farmers in South Africa murdered. That's a lie. It's an utter lie. The New York Times doesn't bother to call him out. He made this comment to Bloomberg in New York City. How hard is it to find that? A simple Google search will turn that up in less than a microsecond. But the violent protests over the killing of Mr. Horner grabbed immediate and outsized attention. That's not true. First off, you're mischaracterizing what happened. A small group of people bum rushed the courthouse. The police escalated the situation, and a vehicle was overturned. Violent protest? No. There was violent action that took place, but there was no protest. The people gathering on the 6th of October gathered to have peace, prayers, speeches, and show sympathy for the family of Brendan Horner and for farm murder victims and torture victims all over the country. That's what they did. A small group of people went towards the courthouse. That was not the thousands of people who were gathered hundreds of meters away. Get the story straight. Don't mislead people. Unbelievable. A 51-year-old businessman, Andre Pinar, was later arrested and charged with attempted murder, malicious damage to property, and public violence. They forget to mention that they charged him with terrorism. He was charged with terrorism. Now, those charges were dropped, but they didn't mention that he was charged with that. AfriForum, a large advocacy group for Afrikaners. Actually, no, that's a fraudulent statement too. AfriForum is a civil rights group in South Africa. Do your research. Take the time, go to their website. And if you disagree, then you say that on their website they claim to be a civil rights organization. And then you can say something else. But you're making a statement that they're an advocacy group for Afrikaners. They advocate for all minorities in South Africa who are oppressed by the government of South Africa. All minorities. They've worked with other groups, including the Basotho and the Tswana people in South Africa, who last time I checked were black Africans. Stop distorting. Stop lying. It's not an advocacy group for Afrikaners. It's an advocacy group. It is a civil rights organization for minorities in South Africa to ensure their civil rights are protected. Unbelievable. Now, they say that has led international efforts to draw attention to their discredited claims. What discredited claims? What does AfriForum claim that's been discredited, and by whom? You don't reference anyone who's discredited. This is shameful nonsense. This is like the stuff we see every single day, the discredited claims that Hunter Biden received money from Burisma. Discredited? He admitted it in an interview. He told the world that he got money from Burisma. And he also told the world that the only reason he got it is because his father was the vice president. What discredited claims? You're fraudulent. You're fraudulent. This is fraudulent. What AfriForum claim has been discredited. And by whom? You can't simply say that and it becomes the truth. You can repeat that over and over. It doesn't make it the truth. It's just a lie. It's an utter lie. The country's Minister of Police, Beketsile, who had visited the town earlier in the week in a bid to de-escalate the tensions, noted in an interview afterward that 4 people, 3 of them black, had been killed in the area since April. So what? It's unfortunate 3 black people have been killed. It's not germane. That's not what the topic is about. This is meant to diminish the suffering, the horror, the torture of an innocent 21 man who's not a farm owner, who's not profited from the so-called profiting from apartheid. Utter nonsense. Now, let's just talk about the things that are not in this article here. There's no mention of the EFF's racial inflammatory language being spewed by Julius Malema. Not a single mention in this article. Just calling him a firebrand and allowing him to use his soundbite that apartheid still exists, implying that white South Africans still rule black South Africans and make them suffer. That's utter nonsense. The majority-rule government has been in power for 26 years and has used its power to discriminate against minorities, white, colored, and Indian, acing them out of government contracts, preventing them from attending universities, denying them job opportunities, and intentionally withdrawing rural security in the disbandment of the commando system to put them at risk and reduce police presence in the rural areas so that they're at risk. That's what the government has done. You want to call that apartheid? I don't know about apartheid, but it's definitely racially biased and discriminatory against all minorities in South Africa, and it's shameful. No mention of the racist language, 20 minutes of race hate that Julius Malema spewed. Not a single mention of that by the New York Times. Now, why is that? Why have they done that? Very dishonest. No mention of the damage that the economic freedom fighters did in Senekal to state property. Now, the ludicrous claim of the reason why the EFF went to Senekal was to protect state property, because state property was in jeopardy from dangerous white radicals who were going to destroy state property. The only state property destroyed previously was the wall to the courthouse, damaged by the South African Police Service, the SAPS, and a police vehicle overturned. A vehicle that was rushing into a crowd of civilians who were not involved in anything standing there and jeopardizing life, limb, and safety, and was tipped over, criminally tipped over, after the reckless behavior of South African Police Service. It was never lit on fire, as was claimed. It caught on fire because it was tipped over. But the EFF claimed that they were going there to protect state property because of that incident on the 6th of October. And what did they do? They broke apart rubbish bins, trash cans, which are made out of concrete, smashed them all over the center of town where they were toying and dancing and singing their race hate Kill the Boer song, which is illegal in South Africa, by the way. They all could have been arrested right there. Not a single person arrested for it. Julius Malema not arrested for inciting violence or domestic terrorism, despite telling his fighters to go to Senekal, attack, attack, and then going in there and singing Kill the Boer. Not arrested for insurrection or terrorism whatsoever. The EFF is not responsible for state property protection. That's the responsibility of the South African Police Service, local Metro Police, the South African National Defense Force, the intelligence services, and the bureaucracy of South Africa. He is simply a member of parliament, not responsible for that. So their ludicrous claims why they went there, not only did they not go there for that reason, they went there to start a civil war. That's why they went to Senekal. No mention of that. Why? Now that's an assessment. But they could reach out and be honest and make an assessment of why EFF was there. Not because of farmland. That's BS. That's not why they're there. People interviewed from the EFF didn't even know about farmland. They weren't even talking about farmland. They're talking about racism, because that's what they were told to say. And they couldn't even articulate it. No mention of any of that here. What about the EFF attacking motorcyclists? I watched it live on video. A crowd surged forward and attacked the motorcyclist and knocked him off his motorcycle when they were trying to escape being pinned in by EFF radicals who were threatening their life and limb. No mention of the EFF physical violence. Not a single white South African or black South African involved there for Brendan Horner or the situation was guilty of any assault on anyone. What about throwing rocks at innocent bystanders, black and white? The EFF picking up big rocks, not pebbles, throwing big rocks the size of my hand at people, at journalists, at bystanders. No discussion of that whatsoever. This was very close. This is a tinderbox that could have gone very badly. No discussion of the EFF's reprehensible behavior in this article. This is a fraudulent, dishonest, intentional effort to undermine the credibility of what actually happened in Senekal. It is fake news. this article in the New York Times. Fake news. It's not even remotely objective. I've just pointed out multiple instances of why this is problematic, ladies and gentlemen, and it is disgraceful. The New York Times pulls this stuff all the time. All the time. This article omits so much information that is relevant to the story to create a narrative that suits their political objectives. And that's unfortunate. The gray lady has lost her way. The New York Times long ago lost its way, but the fact that they pretend to be objective is just disgraceful. Folks, this is the extent of the international coverage you're finding. That's the narrative being pushed, not the facts about what happened in Senekal. Well, if you're not a subscriber to Chris White Africa, I ask you to take a moment, consider becoming a subscriber. If you found this video interesting, or appealing, or maybe informative, feel free to leave a comment if you like. And finally, I ask that you smash the like button down below the video, because likes drive viewership, and viewership is important because the mainstream media in South Africa and abroad don't care to report what's actually happening in South Africa. No, they care to racialize everything, and there's racialization going on here, but they're not reporting the facts or what actually happened. It was the EFF toying, spewing racial hatred, calling for the killing of white South Africans, menacing people, threatening people, throwing rocks at people, damaging state property, tearing down city street signs, breaking apart rubbish bins, and leaving all their trash laying all over the street, and verbally or physically attacking an ANC supporter. A young man wearing an ANC t-shirt, the famous ANC yellow t-shirt with the green black colors on it, was accosted in broad daylight by a gang of EFF thugs. No mention of that whatsoever in this article. Utter nonsense, folks. And there you go. Balance and objective. That's what you're getting here, not the spewed hatred coming from the mainstream media. Take care, folks.